Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to High Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of High Strangeness. Today, I have on Jeff Knox. And folks, I'm just going to tell you something really quick about Jeff. So, I don't go on Twitter very much, but I do go on Twitter for two things, right? One is for this guy who is a self-proclaimed historian of my favorite band, Pavement. And two, I go on Twitter for Jeff Knox's daily UFO posts because there's nothing I love more than UFO history. And Jeff, you do this project called, my gosh, now I'm going to get it wrong. It's Today in UFO History.
Today in UFO History.
Right. I absolutely, first off, like, I consider myself a pretty, fairly strong historian of Midwest, like Iowa, Nebraska, UFO history. But I swear to God, every other month you post something I've never heard of, and I get so excited, and then you send me down a giant rabbit hole on this Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas UFO case. But Jeff, first off, without further ado, I'm going to stop talking. How are you doing, my friend? Thank you so much for doing this.
Doing good. Same old. Doing the same thing, doing my post every day, doing my work every day, and the Today in UFO History thing is pretty much what I do all the time, full time. So
it's such a beautiful service, especially for, I mean, we'll get into the different kinds of UFO fans out there, but for me, like, I love stories. I love the UFO stories. Obviously, I love the stuff we'll never know if it happened or not, but the stories matter, and preserving the history to me is really important, and I don't know of anyone doing a better job of it than you. And so, like, tell me, how did you get into UFO, like, the preservation of these cases?
So I was always kind of like a kind of digital hoarder, I guess, as it were. I kind of, when I was younger, grew up kind of in the internet piracy scene, and so I collected like pretty much just everything. Like, I collected ebooks, like just got hundreds of gigabytes of like scientific ebooks and textbooks and just other books. Like, even if I've never been to look at them, I've always just collected everything that I possibly could. And I've always had an interest in the UFO topic. And so when I've had a kind of a lifelong interest, since a very young child. But when I kind of really super got into it and started doing this kind of full time about a decade ago, I thought I'd put some of my kind of like skills at like digitizing and archiving and preserving things to use when it came to the UFO topic. And that kind of involved me going around to various libraries, scanning files, documents. There's various kind of some of David Clark's books, like I helped get put on the AFU server. Things like Thomas Ballard's abduction study that you can now get on the AFU server. So I kind of did that for many years as I was on the road a lot. I spent most of my time on road trips, going to various UFO conferences and sighting locations, and just things like the research library in Roswell. Visiting Roswell is not just great, for the fun and the crash site. There's a quite good research library at the museum there of various case files of people like Lauren Gross and other famous ufologists, other case files there. So not everything's in New Mexico with David Marler. There's other places you can go. And so I'd visit those places a lot. But then when it came to basically COVID, staying home a lot, started to get on Twitter in like 2022, and started to realize that there just really wasn't a lot of people talking about like the history of the topic. Everybody was so heavily focused on the post-2017 kind of disclosure news. And to me, and I think a lot of other people, that stuff is less interesting. A lot of people, are interested in actually the cases and the history. I think we moved past that. So I decided, I'd seen people do various on today's date kind of thing, like, in aviation history. My local Clark County History Museum has what happened in this county on today's date kind of thing that they do. So I figured, hey, maybe I can do that with UFOs. And so I started to do that every single day. I'd post cases that happened kind of on today's date. And I've been doing that for I celebrated 3 years last week. And I broke over 5,000 posts that I've prepared in the last 3 years.
Well, it's incredible. What I love about your post too, it's not just like, hey, this case happened, here's the year. It's multiple, it's almost, they're like mini threads, and there are some quite amazing resources involved. So, I mean, like, honestly, like, if you're like, if you're into, like, you kind of mentioned, like, I feel like, I on my show probably have bashed the modern UFO activism or UAP activism, whatever they want to call it, enough. But I mean, like, I'm with you. What matters to me is the history. Like, because I feel like a lot of times with modern ufology, people are like, well, it started with the Tic Tac, and let's just focus on everything that's happened since then. But for me, I'm like, I couldn't be less interested in that. But the stories and these cases are so wonderfully valuable, and the way you lay it out on your post, like I was saying, it's not just like, hey, this happened. No, you have the sources. You'll have like old, like, write-ups from Jerome Clark or from Kufos and some of these organizations in the past. And first off, I know, so you kind of explained how you have acquired some of this. So what is actually the process of when you go to like some of these like archives? Do you take a physical scanner with you? How do you actually absorb this stuff?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of scanners made by this company called Caesar, and I bring them with me. I've even when I visited Mike Sword's house, which is where a lot of the Kufos files and like the Iverson Sanderson files are in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I brought it on a plane. I got a specifically large suitcase so I could put the box of my scanner in it, and paid the $70 extra for the extra luggage, and brought that with me so I could scan files. And I did, and I'd bring it with me on my road trips in my car as well, and I'd go around, and that's how I'd scan stuff. So
I mean, you're like a digital ufological Indiana Jones in a lot of ways.
yeah.
Like, I like picturing you on the road driving through the desert Southwest with a scanner in the back, maybe like some crumpled up like fast food bags, and you're just on to the next place. I love it.
I literally, some of those trips, I lived in my car for a month or more. I'd be on the road 6, 7, 8 weeks at a time, and a lot of the time, really, there's just not like hotels to stay at when you're in the middle of, like, say, Area 51, for example. There's nowhere you're gonna hop in and like catch a stay. And so a lot of nights sleeping in the the SUV or whatever rental vehicle I had at the time on these road trips. But yeah, a lot of material I've gotten from other people that I've scanned as well. Like I say, a lot of stuff at quite a bit of stuff at Michael Sword's house. That stuff had already been scanned by other people over the years, and through my involvement kind of with that group of individuals, I've got access to quite a bit of material and primary source material that like most people don't have, that I also include in my post. So that's kind of something special you get with my post that you really won't get anywhere else, is that you might be seeing some document for the first time that 4 people have seen and nobody's seen in decades, because I've dug it out of like the files that Kufos had, that I've got scans for. So,
Yeah,
or I'll provide the original, like I've got scans of like James McDonald's files, and the Condon files, and so I'm able to pull out the original documents that like these books or whatnot will talk about, so you can actually see the document themselves. And that's kind of something that, like you mentioned, how I include the sources. That's something that I'm as a researcher, I want to see the primary source material. I want to see the secondary source material. I want to see all the sources. And so with my post, not only is there kind of this brief narrative description of what happened, and it tries to be pretty unbiased kind of narrative description. A lot of those are actually written by another Kufos guy called George Eberhardt. And I write several of them as well. I help him update something called the UFOs and Intelligence Timeline, which is a PDF he's been putting out for years. That's like almost 1,000 pages basically the post I do with various sources. And I've been helping him build that out with additional sources, new cases, and whatnot for the last few years. But I like to include all these sources, and not just what the source is, but I try to include the actual pages, because not everybody has an obscure book from 1950s or whatever to actually go look this material up. And so usually I actually have almost all the sources I include and list that I can provide that people can look at. That way people can go look at that material and come to their own conclusions, do their own research on the case, and decide what they want to think about it. They don't have to believe me. They don't have to believe the narrative that was written. They can do their own research and look at all the material that, I have access to. And so I like to put that out there, and so I include everything. And so some of these threads are quite large, because there's quite a few sources and that I include material for. So
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. You're like kind of like tonal approach to this is you really leave your own personal opinion out. It's like, here's the case, here's the data we have, here are the sources. Come up with your own conclusion. And like, it's not. I do. I mean, like, I have such deep appreciation for people who completely leave their own belief system. It's hard to do when it comes to UFOs. Myself included. I know sometimes maybe my thoughts on UFOs will creep in even when I don't intend them to. But you have done. I mean, it's really academic work. The way I see it, and it's so damn valuable because there's been so many times where I've known about a case, I've loved the case, and I thought I had all the material possible on a Midwest case, for example. And then I'll see a post you'll do about it. I'm like, oh yeah, I love this case. It's a Nebraska case. Oh, and then all of a sudden I find 4 or 5 sources or papers you'll put on or excerpts from a book I've never heard of that completely like elaborate on the story in such a way where I've actually been able to visit sites in Nebraska and Iowa because of your posts. And not like, for a lot of people going to look at a cornfield where a UFO might have landed in 1957 isn't a big deal. But for me, I get so excited by it. Like it's fun to visit these places. There's like, without sounding too woo, a magic about it, like
it's, for me, it's legend tripping. Yeah, I mean,
yes.
it's not, did it really happen? Was there really an alien spaceship or whatever at this location? Maybe not. Doesn't really matter though. Like, it's like the myth that's built around that location. Like, this is why I visit places like Area 51. Do I think they have aliens there? No, I don't really think they do. But I still like to go out there, and it's also just nice, beautiful sky, and you can go out there and camp and watch the night sky, and it's a fun time. And so I've done that. I mean, I've literally spent months camping outside of Area 51 out there over the years. So yeah, it's legend tripping. I think it's enjoyable. That's why I'd like to visit. I visited lots of locations over the years. Unfortunately, not a lot on the East Coast because I've been mostly kind of West Coast or Southwest. But yeah.
Well, if you wouldn't mind just kind of like, kind of going back, like, do you mind, I mean, because I am curious, like, I know it's probably a question you've been asked a zillion times, but I feel like I am very curious, like, I guess, like, how did you get into UFOs? And then how has your, like, idea on what UFOs and UFO culture is, like, evolved over the years? Because, I mean, like, it's rare that someone gets into UFOs and they have the same thoughts about them forever. Like mine have changed like a dozen times. Like I'm definitely more skeptical than I ever have been. But I'm interested to hear your kind of journey with UFOs.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, I got into them like a lot of people, like really, really young. I was probably like 7 or 8 or something, and I had seen like something on television. I grew up in the Bay Area. I watched like PBS and stuff like that, and I think I'd seen like a documentary on it that I thought was kind of interesting at the time. I kind of like kicked off like a minor interest, and then like in elementary school, like the school library kind of had a few books on it, that I would check out and kind of looked at, and I even would listen to I listened to like Coast to Coast in the early '90s, when I would be staying over at a friend's house for a sleepover, and so I, like a lot of people, kind of grew up on like things like Bob Lazar and like a lot of these stories, and while I didn't necessarily believe they were true, I really hoped they were at the time, for many years, like I hope that's true, but as I kind of got older, when I got into I would follow a lot of the early bulletin board stuff. Like I got into UFOs and like the early online culture as well. And on the early internet, there was a site called UFO Mind that I used to check out quite a bit. Um, and things like Glenn Campbell's Desert Rat newsletter that he kind of would put out like in the 90s. So I kind of got into the online culture, kind of had my own little UFO group that I called the International Center for Paranormal Research. Even had a website for a while. But it was really just me and some friends, kind of like a mutual interest online. Um, but I started to get more skeptical, kind of in those years as I got older. I'm kind of a very scientific, kind of engineering, kind of oriented, kind of like guy. And after college, kind of started to get into it really heavy again. Started like just reading books by the masses. Read several hundred UFO books.
Wow.
And just started like absorbing podcasts and stuff like. And this is the early podcasting days. But there's even back in like 2008 to like 2011, there's like a early UFO podcasting culture that was kind of pretty strong back in the days. So I kind of just threw myself into that kind of pretty heavily again. But by at that point, I was kind of more. I used to be kind of a nuts and bolts guy. I figured, there was the possibility. I believe that there's aliens out there in the universe. I don't have any
Hmm.
doubt about that. Is the question is, are they coming here? I don't think that's necessarily physically impossible. Now, I don't necessarily think they are, but at the time I thought maybe, and I thought just the sheer amount of people that claim to see things means there must be something to this topic.
Hmm.
Even if it's not alien, something interesting and sociological or like psychological about this topic. And so I started to kind of just then approach the topic. Like I said, I call myself kind of like a historian, or almost kind of like a folklorist that collects the tales and archives the history of what people believe. And it's not, while I'm personally a skeptical individual, that's not really how I approach the work I do in the UFO topic. Like I'm not out there debunking cases or trying to explain them away. I'm just kind of preserving the story of them and the records of the cases. And so that's kind of the approach I take now. So I'm kind of agnostic. These days, I'm open to the possibility of being visited, but I need some good, confirmed physical evidence of some kind to like kind of get there. But like I said, that doesn't really matter for me because I think this topic's important, just historically speaking. I mean, we preserve the history of all sorts of fandoms and other weird hobbies and other things people do. And the influence that flying saucer culture has had widespread through society is undeniable. Just for that
Yes.
reason alone, it's important to preserve and collect historically. And so that's kind of where I am now with it at this point. So I kind of went from a hopeful believer to nuts and bolts to kind of a agnostic kind of historian of the topic nowadays.
I, oh my God, I love that for so many reasons, and I find it so damn refreshing because, more than ever, I feel like people want people, in this topic and just like in politics and everything, to draw a line in the sand and say like, I'm in this camp or I'm in this camp. But I think the healthiest way almost to be with UFOs and some of these things that we can't prove is to be a fence sitter, is to be agnostic, be open to the idea that it's possible, but also realize like it may not be. We don't have great evidence. I mean, like, there is evidence of something happening, but doesn't necessarily mean it's anomalous. Like Ted Phillips. I love the work of Ted Phillips. He did he the Marley Wood stuff and just his like physical trace evidence, the Delphos,
Log, yeah.
Kansas. I love the work he did. He made a great contribution, but I don't know what the physical evidence means. It doesn't necessarily mean we're being visited by UFO knots,
Yeah. 'Cause
But like you said, it really is the cultural impact is undeniable in media, in folklore, in like cults have been started by UFO believers. I mean, like it's kind of a quasi modern 20th century religion in a way.
it is.
It's not tax it's not tax free, but like it kind of is.
Yeah, it's and I've mentioned this before. It's kind of it's not a traditional religion per se in the sense that it has like a bishop or a leader and sacred text. but also in a way it kind of does have its sacred text, your Valet books, your Hynek books, and they kind of are your, leaders, your prophets, kind of the UFO culture that people do adhere to. It's just it's a religion you can believe in without really having to believe in anything supernatural, because like I say, the idea that aliens exist out there is likely, and just kind of science and biology, and maybe they come here, maybe they don't, but it's not as big of a leap as believing in something like a god or a supernatural being of some kind.
Right.
And so it's kind of just like a modern secular kind of religion in a sort of way.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of looking at it. That's yeah. I mean, like, and I know, like, along with your historical preservation, you definitely, like, I can tell, have an interest in UFO culture. Like,
Yeah.
you just, I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, I do sort of like feel like, I mean, like, this is me. Here we go. I'm going to talk about disclosure and UFO activism. But like, I feel like a lot of times where I sort of feel sorry for these people who are so interested in disclosure and this kind of modern UAP activist movement, because I feel like they're really missing the fun part of UFO culture. Like, the stories are fun. I rarely see people, like, in modern ufology talking about the actual cases. They're
Hmm.
talking about more the machinations of the government and whistleblowers, which I'm like, I couldn't be less interested in that.
Well, and there's a lot of people. I've encountered a lot of people just on social media that even the idea of them reading a UFO book, they're like, "What do I need to read a book for?" Like, I got podcasts. So I'm sorry, but you can't learn everything from a podcast. Like,
No.
you've actually got to go do some reading with your eyeballs to actually learn about the case. And because many a times you'll find what the story you heard on some podcast doesn't actually really match up with what you'll find if you go look at the original kind of case material and documents. But the story may be still just as fascinating, but things might be different about it.
Right, right. And I'm sure I've been guilty of this too, where I'll talk about a case and I'll talk about it as a good case people should take seriously. So there is like an agenda and a spin on podcasts a lot of times when they bring up, various cases. Like,
Hmm.
this is a bad one. I feel this is a bad case. But like my opinion should have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, yeah. And see, that's what I believe too. It's like what I think about a case is not really relevant. Like that's why when I write case summaries and whatnot, I try to keep them as I don't know if you can hear my goose going off.
Oh, the beautiful, beautiful tenor on those geese.
Yeah. But yeah, so I try and keep it kind of as like unbiased, and just as basic of a narrative as possible, because what I think doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
And I don't. That's one of the things I think that's weird about a lot of people in this culture is why they get so mad that somebody doesn't think the same thing as they do. Like, why do you care that I don't like your favorite case? Like, what does that matter? Like, you like what you like, I'll like what I like. We can get along. We can have discussions. Like, you don't have to convince me. I don't have to convince you. We can get along. But there's just so many people that won't.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you. And I'm not trying to like harp on like the things I don't like about modern ufology, but like if you're a student of the history of ufology, there is always been an aspect of very problematic people and using UFOs for problematic ideas or belief systems. And I don't feel like that's gone away. In some ways, I feel like UFOs have been are so politicized now, and like, do you see the problems that like when I say problems, I mean like I find modern UFO culture to be so like vitriolic and kind of toxic in a lot of ways. Do you feel like that's always been there, or do you find that now with so much social media that is just worse than ever?
So I think there has always been an element of that. If you look back even before social media, back when you'd have these mailing lists, email mailing lists like UFO updates back in the day.
Yeah.
Even before that, there's bulletin board systems, something called FidoNet, there's PairNet on the FidoNet bulletin board system. And you look back then, ufologists were getting into it with each other, calling each other nasty names, insulting each other. Like there is a lot of vitriol even back then. And then even if you go back to looking at letters from people in the UFO community in the 50s, and the 60s, like if you look at their correspondence, same thing. There's a lot of vitriol and personal attacks and whatnot going on. So I think that's always existed. The difference is now with social media, there's just so many more people, and it's kind of like a pile-on, add-on effect. And
Yeah.
it's just the the algorithm isn't really designed for conducive conversations about issues. It's meant for like to drive engagement, and what drives engagement is emotions. And so you want people to be irritated or highly emotional about things, because then they're tweeting back and forth and they're using your service more.
Right.
And so I think it's certainly added to it, but it's always been there in the background. It's just most of the people didn't see it either, because unless they were part of the research community, they didn't really see that. They saw the ufologists strictly from what they saw through TV shows, documentaries, or like magazine articles, or a conference they go to. They don't see a lot of the behind the scenes drama that's kind of always existed.
Right. Right. Like, in terms of, I've never really, asked anyone this before, but I feel like there's no better person to ask than you. But like with this kind of like in the last few years, as we all know, since the Tic Tac video and the New York Times thing was released, there has UFOs have been, kind of crossed over into mainstream media, and even with I mean, like, these hearings that we're having in DC. I wonder, like, do you like have any like I know this is speculation, but like, do you think a lot of these politicians who are hearing this stuff are genuinely think that the government has like not like non-human intelligence, non-biologics, or whatever they were calling it, or crash retrieval, or like crash saucers and stuff like that? Or do you think they're playing a part, like in a I know this is speculation, but like for a more nefarious reason? Or do you think like a guy like Tim Burchett, who I am deeply not a fan of as a human being, but do you think he believes there's something to this? I can't tell with him.
Yeah, that's the hard thing, right? So I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think in many cases they absolutely are using it for attention. I mean, quite frankly, I would not know who Tim Burchett or Burlinson or any of these people are if it was not for their attack, the UFO topic. And so it's certainly given some of these guys a more of a national, even if limited, platform, because they've engaged this UFO topic. But again, given who we have as politicians, I think a lot of them are highly gullible and credulous, and probably end up believing some of this stuff, or at the very least, some of their staffers do, that kind of are doing a lot of the actual busy, hard work behind the scenes. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, but I do think it's absolutely being exploited by a lot of these people. And I think a lot of their interest. This is something I've gotten arguments with, endlessly with people. That I just don't think people always bring up, well, what about Schumer or Gillibrand? And I always said that I never believed their interest was as big as people thought it was. I mean, like, for example, Schumer mentioned it like briefly, in between talking about fentanyl and something else. Like, I mean, it just never really seemed to be, even though they may put their names on these bills and whatnot, I don't think that necessarily implies as deep or strong of an interest as the UFO community believes it does. And we've seen a lot of those people like kind of step to the background, like Gillibrand, for example, is kind of like not really a major figure in it anymore.
Right.
So I think these people come and go. Maybe they have some sincere interest, and they kind of, like many people, realize, well, where's the actual evidence? Like, is it just stories? And I think some of them kind of get tired and move on, and we get some new politicians that come in to replace them. And so, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, probably.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. I feel like it's like, and you know what I will say? Who can blame them? There are bigger fish to fry right now than finding out if the government has crashed UFOs. I mean, I'd rather see them do other things with their political positions, to be honest.
And that's the thing. Like, I love UFOs as much as anybody, but I mean, let's be realistic here. It's a fringe topic, and we have much bigger world concerns right now than this. No matter how many people believe disclosure would bring upon the golden age of free energy and all of our problems would be ended, yeah, we just have bigger problems right now than dealing with this kind of stuff. So
Right. Like I like, but the one thing I'll say is like potentially they may have better data, but I mean like just to suppose that they have like alien bodies and flying saucer or, crashed UFOs, in Area 51, like, that is such a leap.
Yeah.
Like,
And see, that's my position as well. Like, do I believe the government could be more transparent about the information that they've collected? Absolutely. I
mhm.
mean, we know there's UFO files that are lost, that I think we should be able to see. Do I think they overclassify stuff that they really don't need to? Sure, absolutely. But do I believe inside that stuff there's evidence of, like I say, alien spaceships or recovered bodies? No, I'm not convinced of that, personally. So,
Yeah.
which is why I'm more interested in government transparency on a general level, not just the UFO topic. I think we need to change classification guidelines in general, and that would include anything like UFO material. But
Right.
I don't believe that there's a cover up of alien spaceships or bodies personally. Um, just that there's stuff they've been less than transparent about. And they may have had good reason. Maybe they were covering for an actual important program that had nothing to do with UFOs. Um, and that's maybe why. But I think a lot of this stuff at this point, like if we're talking about stuff that's over 50 years old, like, come on, that was half a century ago. Let it all out.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
release it all. Like, there's nothing you could have done, horrible or not, that at this point you can't just tell us it already happened. I mean, they've already admitted to, atrocities committed on Tuskegee Airmen and other things
Yep.
like MK Ultra. Like, come on, you can tell us, you can release all those old files, whatever's in them, let us see it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the most interesting thing to me would be to see how they manipulate the UFO topic and UFO believers and conventions and researchers. Like, even like, the William Moore stuff. I'm sure there are more people than William Moore and Jimmy Chandra who were manipulated, and I find that deeply fascinating. That's like kind of James Bond espionage type stuff and UFO espionage. That's a whole subtopic that needs to be explored.
Yeah, I have a feeling personally that a lot of that may have happened a bit more organically than people think. Like, there's a lot of question about whether, like, the stuff Doty did, for example, was actually ever approved by anyone in
Right.
power. How much of that was just Doty being Doty, for
Yeah.
example.
Right.
So I think might find out that a lot of that stuff just came down to, like, one guy's choice, like, and not really some government, like, effort to kind of, like, control or, like, manipulate
Right.
things. Um, I think even George Knapp once said, when talking about the media and their coverage of, like, UFO stories, and whether he's ever been manipulated into changing, like, a story, or to stigmatize a topic in any way. And he said, no, they don't have to. Like, they don't. The government doesn't need to do that stuff because, like, really, the UFO community does it to itself. We stigmatize ourselves plenty, that
Yeah.
the government can just enjoy the benefits of what we do to ourselves. They don't actually have to be out there manipulating the media, for example, about the UFO topic. You can let the crazy politicians in Congress do that, or whatever. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of it is probably, like, hands off, where they're just kind of enjoying the benefits, reaping the benefits of, other stuff.
Right. It's like letting a wildfire just kind of like, yeah, just, maybe keeping it sort of, in check, but like letting it's a controlled burn that we're just doing to ourselves. Well, you bring up a great kind of something I've never really thought about. Like, and that's the kind of the concept of Richard Doty. And folks, if you don't know who Richard Doty was, he was sort of famous for the Paul Benowitz affair and allegedly, which I kind of do think there's something there that he misled this poor man into like a crazy ufological belief system and ended up sort of ruining his life. And there's more to the story. That's a very general thing. I recommend the book Project Beta if you're interested in more. But even like Lou Elizondo, like it does seem like at first he claimed to be part of this program. Then people kind of did some research and found out, like, I don't know if he even was part of this program or if the program existed. But the more and more I hear about it, it almost seems like he was like a solo actor in all this, that he wasn't pushed to release this stuff, but he used his resume as, we got to listen to Lou Elizondo. I feel like you bring up an amazing point. Do you feel like he's another example of kind of an organic solo actor in his disclosure kind of movement thing?
Yeah, I think. I mean, there's people have argued that again, he's being from a counterintelligence background. He's been kind of put in this community to cause problems, and he has said, he's used exact words that destroy ufology.
Yeah.
So, people have made that argument, and considering his background, I mean, I suppose that's certainly a possibility, but I think it's more likely he found himself in a position with a pretty decent military career opportunity, first signing up with To the Stars, and that unfortunately apparently didn't work out as well as they had hoped, but he's kind of built quite a successful post-military career off of this. And I think this happens kind of with unfortunately, a lot of people that basically launder their military credentials for credibility on this topic that, perhaps really shouldn't have as much credibility as people give them.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting angle. I never thought about though, because I guess for some reason I just sort of trusted Richard Jody, which is a crazy thing to say, but that he was doing this at the behest of the AFOSI, or if that was that his organization he claimed to.
AFOSI,
yeah. So yeah. But I never really considered that. Oh, maybe he was just some dude who was interested in UFOs and decided to insert himself into the scene.
Yeah, I mean, and he's still around.
I know.
He's back, and people are still listening to him. And
so crazy.
Yeah, it's wow.
Yeah, I know. Wow, what do you say? It's but it is funny because I do see in the last 5 years where I think it's a lot of people who are maybe potentially newer to the topic. They're like, wow, this Richard Doty guy, he's saying some wild stuff, and we have to believe him because he was part of the military. That's the thing with all these whistleblowers coming forward. When you think about kind of how you framed it, that they're potentially solo actors who are looking for a post-military career and to make a couple bucks. I mean, is that what we're seeing, do you think, with all these whistleblowers coming forward?
I don't necessarily think with all of them. I think quite a few of them seem kind of, I mean, I don't mean to be offensive, but credulous and gullible themselves. And many of them, quite frankly, I wouldn't call them whistleblowers because most of them are they had a UFO sighting. That's what they had. They don't have evidence of spaceships, or alien bodies. They're not blowing the whistle on anything. They just had some UFO sighting while on duty, for example. So really, they're more UFO witnesses than whistleblowers.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I have personally just not been impressed with any of the so-called whistleblowers or things that have been presented. Like I said, none of them have really presented any actual real evidence to support any of the claims that they've made. And many of them are just kind of, again, laundering old UFO stories, like David Grush, for example. The stories he's telling, he learned in UFO books, and from other people, that, these are old stories that are just getting repeated now. And this is why it's important to study the history, right? Because these new people, they see a Doty and they don't know the history. You've got to actually spend some time studying the history of this topic. And you're not going to get a good grasp on it like that, It takes, somebody being the topic a couple of years, reading lots of books and, material to really start to kind of get any real grasp on, the history of this topic. But it's important to know that history. So when things repeat, and things always repeat, that's the kind of nature of ufology, is that no story or even hoax really truly ever dies. It gets dragged back up from the grave and repeated as a zombie. And we thought we got rid of the Aztec hoax years ago, but it's back again, and getting a lot of play. And so no story really ever dies in this topic. So you've got to understand the history if you're going to understand the present, and know what to avoid in the present. Because there's just so many people that don't understand the history of just the misinformation in this topic and the manipulation in this topic. And so they don't recognize it when they see it happening right in front of their face now.
Right. Good point. I guess, I mean, this is such a hard question, but let's say you had a neighbor move in, it was a 19-year-old kid who, had bright eyes for UFOs, and he was like, Jeff, oh, wise one, I want to buy 3 UFO books to kind of catch myself up with this topic, and so I can avoid some of the mistakes I see a lot of people making. Are there a few books that you would recommend to people to kind of like get up to speed? That's a tough question. I know
Yeah,
that.
there's so many good books, or basically basic books. Like there's quite a few good lists out there. Like Kufos has a list, a recommended reading list of,
Mhm.
but you're talking, like top 10 list, and then like
Right.
top 20 list of like secondary source kind of book material and etc.
Right.
Uh, but to just kind of get a good overview of the history, a book I'd recommend, and it's fairly recent, is the book by Greg Agesian, that was put out with Oxford Press last year, called After the Saucers Came. Um, and it's a pretty good general overview of the history of the topic, covering just kind of like background stuff from like the government's investigations to actual various cases like human rights encounters, close encounter of third kind cases. So it's a very good general introduction to the topic. And Greg's a legit historian. He's not an amateur like me. That's his like professional career. And he's done the research. People may have seen him on. Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
Um, People may have seen him on. His book was featured on. Uh, what's that late night guy that does This Week
Oh,
with the comedian
John Oliver.
John Oliver? The UFO segment he did last year. His book
Mm-hmm.
was featured on it. And he actually helped with the preparation for that show. But he's an excellent historian that has done the deep research in the topic. He's actually got peer-reviewed papers on various historical aspects of the topic published going back like over 10 years ago. So I recommend his book. Another book I highly recommend is a book that was put out by Michael Swords and what was called the Swords History Group that I'm kind of involved with. It was basically a group of kind of some of the veteran researchers from like Kufos and NICAP, people like Michael Swords, Jan Aldrich, Barry Greenwood, Mark Rodiger, from Kufos, George Eberhardt, Phyllis Budinger, who used to analyze case samples, physical trace samples. A lot of people like that would meet together to kind of talk about the history and preservation and whatnot of it. And they created this book about a little over, probably I think it was like 12 years ago, 15 years ago, called UFOs and Government. And it's got chapters it's primarily written by Robert Powell and Michael Swords, but chapters written by kind of the leading ufologists from their regions. So you got like Vincent Juan Ballester Olmos from Spain, who wrote the chapter about Spain's coverage of the UFO topic. You got like Bill Chalker from Australia that wrote a chapter about Australia. You got Klaus Vaughn, who wrote a chapter kind of about Sweden and ghost rockets and whatnot. And so it's kind of a book that's covers the governments from around the world's involvement in the UFO topic and the investigations they've done. That'll give you an excellent overview of kind of the early years of the UFO topic and the government's involvement in it. So that's book number 2 I'd highly recommend. Another book that's just got a lot of good cases might be like the UFO evidence books, like NICAP had the UFO evidence book. Richard Hall put out a volume 2 in 2001. That's a nice thick book that's got all sorts of cases broken up by different categories, like electromagnetic cases, pilot cases, close encounter cases. And so that's just a book if you want a lot of general kind of cases and the evidence, as it were, as presented by NICAP. So that would be 3 books. If you wanted to add a 4th, the UFO Encyclopedia set by Jerome Clark's just a good collection because it's articles by lots of people, lots of respected researchers covering not just the hardcore UFO topic, but even gets into things like various cryptid cases. Because and that's I also in my case posts. So not everything is just straight up like a UFO sighting case or whatnot. I do cover like Bat Squatch. Or the Van Meter visitor case, which is the anniversary of kind of over these yesterday and the next couple of days.
Yeah.
So there's stuff I cover that are kind of UFO adjacent, like flying winged humanoids and stuff like that. And you can find all that in the UFO Encyclopedia, and so that's another good kind of collection that somebody should have.
Yeah, I keep that on my coffee table, and I nearly every night page through it and just read a different thing. It is such a valuable resource, and it's a beautiful book. the presentation's amazing. You know, like I love it so much.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
good book.
yeah, yeah. Well, so you, I mean, you know, it seems like, you know, you're dipping your toe in some other Fortean waters, you know, aside from you know, the UFO topic. So it sounds like you have just a general love of the strange and unusual.
Yeah, because like I said, I used to I used to be in this topic mostly kind of nuts and bolts. So for a long time, I even ignored things like abductions, like because I thought that was wooey garbage nonsense,
Right.
like, and I had just no interest in that kind of stuff. So I would learn about the really famous ones, of course, like that you see in documentaries and whatnot, but
Yeah.
never really had a real interest in it. Um, but now, like I said, my interest in this topic is more almost like psychosocial. Like I'm interested in why people are interested in these cases, why people believe what they do, like how they came to believe what they do. And so that involves more than just nuts and bolts UFO cases now. So I've expanded my interest into some of the cryptids and other stuff. My knowledge isn't as great as it is about UFOs with some of that stuff, but a lot of that stuff, there's always been kind of adjacent ties to it. People have always tied like UFOs to Bigfoot, like Stan Gordon had
Mm-hmm.
a book about it. So there's always been kind of like these offshoots of ufology that address these kind of things. Mothman has always been a part of the UFO topic for some reason, even though there's no UFO. Um,
Right.
but that's always been kind of one of the classic kind of cases. So there's always been kind of like these kind of things that are more typically cryptid kind of cases that have been part of the UFO topic. Because I guess the idea being is just that there's some kind of non-human entity of some kind flying
Mm-hmm.
around. So, so from my perspective now, which like I say is more like sociological and psychological and whatnot, I have an interest in kind of all kind of fringe beliefs systems
Yeah.
and beliefs, and when I say fringe, I don't mean anything negative by that. I
Yeah.
just mean like from a statistical like perspective, it is fringe. So,
Yeah. They're
um,
outsider topics, outsider interests. You know, like, you know, it's it. You mentioned Barry Greenwood, who I kind of learned about Barry Greenwood only a few years ago. Unfortunately, he's somebody I should have been aware of much sooner. But he is too like a preservationist and has a lot of material. I think maybe he gave a lot of it to David Marler. But one time years ago, I saw a video. I believe it was with Erica Luce, maybe, where she was interviewing Barry, and Barry held up a piece of Joe Symington's space pancake.
yep.
Am I remembering that correctly? Does he
Yeah.
have a piece of the?
Okay. So
Wow.
yeah. So when that's one of the cases that I did a pretty deep dive on research into and lectured on. And when I was looking into it, I wanted to find out about the pieces of pancakes. Like, where are these pancake pieces? Like, and do they still exist? And so, of course, there's still a couple pieces that are at the museum in Dayton, Ohio, that the Air Force still
Really?
has. Yeah,
Is that public? You can actually go see that?
they used to be. From what I read from something Michael Huntington said, that's no longer public. It's like in the
Mm.
warehouse section. Um, but besides for that, allegedly Joe Symington, he had some samples himself. Those he ended up giving one sample to a newspaper guy who had it tested. He had some, but his house burnt down, I guess, and one of the remaining samples that he had got destroyed.
Oh.
But Barry Greenwood himself did have a sample of Joe Symington's pancake, which is now in the possession of David Marler in New Mexico. So you could feasibly go see it there and take a look at it. I'd be real tempted to not want to bite it just to
Yeah.
say I ate it. But
I know. I would have eaten all three of them.
yeah, yeah, pretty bland pancakes. But yeah, I don't. I asked Barry, but I don't quite remember off the top of my head how he ended up with the sample. I think it might have been one that NICAP had, because so NICAP also got a sample of the pancake that at the time NICAP wasn't really interested in what they called contactee cases. In fact, they wrote a whole thing about this new contactee claim in Eagle River, Wisconsin, and they weren't really interested in it, and they were kind of upset that publicity was put out that NICAP was involved with this case, and they wanted NICAP to analyze the sample, and so they were going to send it to this other guy that used to be involved with CSI New York, Civilian Officer Intelligence New York. That was Alexander Mabane, who was a chemist. And he told them he could analyze the sample, but it would cost, like $500. And,
Right.
NICAP's like, what? We don't got no money,
Yeah.
particularly for something we don't even believe in. Like, get out of here with that nonsense. So I have a feeling that might have been the one NICAP had at some point, but I'm not 100% sure on it. But yeah, at one point he did have it. And he's like the OG archivist, like
Yeah.
collection guy. There's articles from the 90s, like newspaper articles, about how like he has the largest collection in the world of like UFO material, because he's been collecting everything from like newspapers and books and for just ever. So I
Yeah.
believe a bunch of it, if not most of it's been sent to David Marler in New Mexico now as well. And Jan Aldrich is another one of these guys that works with Barry Greenwood pretty extensively. That had a pretty decent collection, and he just finished moving, I think, most of the rest of it this week to David Marler's in New Mexico. So
Oh,
that, that
it makes me so
collection,
happy.
yeah, it's pretty great. I've yet to be able to make it down there, unfortunately, since he's opened it. So I would love to, because it sounds like it's turned out to be a pretty great collection, and hopefully,
Yeah.
eventually, get a lot of that stuff digitized and online, and so it can be shared. Um, Obviously, that costs money, and that's the kind of another sad thing about this topic is there's not a lot of money for the historical work or preservation, which I think
Right.
is more important than the money being thrown at podcasters and other things like for disclosure that may or not ever come. We have for mineral amounts of money, like we could for less than Jesse Michaels has offered somebody for a podcast.
Yeah.
We could literally digitize everything there and put it
Oh,
online for like 5 years. Like, but
amazing.
you need money to do that kind of stuff. But hopefully we'll get there because not everybody can travel to archives, and that's why I think
Right.
it's important to get a lot of this digitized and online if we can. So, everybody can look at this material.
Right. Well, Isaac Coy has made quite a few things available, hasn't he? Has he not?
Oh yeah, yeah. Isaac
Yeah.
Coy is another hero. He's like
Yeah.
Isaac's amazing.
Yeah.
He's helped get digitized and put online just the vast majority of old UFO publications and journals and material, and it's all on the archive for the Unexplained and Sweden's server there that we can go and like if it wasn't for that material, my posts would be a lot less in depth as they are,
Right.
because just the vast amount of material that's now available. So if he can get permission to release it, he's a big stickler on copyright. I'm not so much a stickler on copyright, sorry. Um, but he's a big stickler on copyright. And if he can get permission from the original publication, whoever put it out, to put it out, then it ends up on that site and you can check it out. And it's a great resource. Everybody should check out the archives of the Unexplained server
I
and look
agree.
at all that
Yeah.
stuff.
It's a
Everything from old APRO bulletins to obscure bulletins from Malaysia, to, various Swedish new UFO bulletins, it's broken down by country. And so it's not just like English language material, it's a whole variety of foreign language material that people just never see. Like, that's one of the other things I like to do is like, I like to present a lot of foreign cases in my threads because a lot of people don't see a lot of that stuff,
right.
or they only see kind of brief bits of information that's been included in a English language book somewhere. Sometimes you got to look at the actual original foreign language material. And thank goodness for tools like Google Translate and stuff now that, people like me that can't speak these languages, I can actually go and look at that stuff as well, which is pretty great.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. No. His. I mean, you can spend lose yourself for days and weeks on his website.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. I wanted to ask you because you mentioned that you did a pretty deep dive into the Joe Symington space pancake case. Were you able to learn anything kind of new? Like I've always I've heard rumors. Nothing that I can trace back to any kind of real evidence, but like I did hear rumors that he had UFO encounters after his initial kind of famous sighting. And is there anything you learned about Joe Symington that may not be out there in kind of like the original story, the one that most people know about?
I mean, there is yeah. So it's actually one of the reasons, like for me, a case I find cases really interesting where I can find something new or at least present some piece of information that may have always been hidden in the case file somewhere, but just has never really been talked about. Like, those are the cases I really love, when I can actually present something new kind of about the case. And the Joe Simonton case is one of these examples where it's a piece of information I found that was actually in old literature somewhere, but like just nobody was ever talking about it. And people may have heard about it now because a particular famous podcasting couple watched my lecture and then did a podcast episode about it.
Right.
But one of the things I found was there's a guy who claimed that he actually hypnotized Joe Simonton, and that's how the case happened. So this guy, I guess, was in the real estate business. And if people don't know, the kind of like the Eagle River, Wisconsin area is really a touristy kind of like cabins and kind of a tourist kind of like location. And supposedly this guy wanted to, drive tourism up or something for local real estate and whatnot in the area. And so he claims that he actually hypnotized Joe Simonton, like a couple times, like making him repeat the story kind of like in his mind. So he would repeat it accurately, and then he would go tell the story to people.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's a weird little bit. And of course, with this, like, I don't know how you prove that. People have pointed out the guy that made this claim, like, did not have any actual, like, experience in hypnosis. So how would he actually have pulled this off? But he did, in fact, make the claim. It may have been an old Fate issue I found it in. I think that's maybe where I found the detail and with the guy's name. But he did make that claim. But there is actually somebody in Joe Simonton's life that probably did actually have the chops, if he did want to help pull it off. And that would be the judge, Frank Carter, I believe his name was, who kind of Joe Simonton reported the case to. Judge Carter was not exactly new to the UFO topic. In fact, Joe Simonton had previously been to a meeting of kind of like this UFO group with the judge.
Really?
For his encounter, yeah. And so that's why he reported it to this judge, who was kind of like a friend. But this judge was also a bit of an amateur magician. I posted photos of him kind of in this big magician outfit and whatnot, and he was a member of the International Bureau of Magician or some organization like that. And he had a hobby in like things like hypnotism and other such like things, including UFOs. And one of these lectures I think Simonton went to was a lecture about like life and outer space and whatnot. So I don't know if the one guy's hypnotism story kind of holds much water, but I mean there was other people in his life that could have done it. But again, I don't necessarily know that you have to go there with the Joe Simonton case. If I wanted to give you kind of like a psychological explanation, the case started off with him just kind of like sitting at his table, like making some food, breakfast, and he heard kind of a sound supposedly that he thought was like an airplane going over his kind of a shack, kind of shanty house that he kind of lived in. So the argument that's been made is that it was kind of that he basically fell asleep, while he's sitting there at his table eating breakfast, and it was kind of just a hypnopompic kind of like hallucination or dream of sorts that he kind of integrated kind of into reality.
Right.
So and in that case, he's not necessarily lying per se either. Like, he may actually believe he had that experience. It just was not per se oriented in fact. I mean, it's a strange story. I mean, it's kind of a strange, nonsensical story in the first place, right? Because you get these like Italian-looking aliens that land, and all they want is a jug of water filled up and to cook, a few pancakes, and then they take off again. Like, I mean, even people like Valet and others have pointed out that it's kind of a goofy story. Like, it doesn't make any real kind of sense. Like, particularly if you're thinking about, are they alien beings? Like, what need does alien beings have for a jug of water and to cook some ultra bland, like bran, called like pancakes? So there's another researcher, Jose Cuerva. He's a South American researcher, and he kind of came up with a theory, something called the distortion theory. And it's kind of, you can think of it as the experience isn't the real experience. It's almost like a screen memory, or what that person expects to experience based perhaps on like their cultural influences and whatnot. And so, like, it's a custom built experience for that experiencee. So it may not even be that the whole thing with the pancakes and the water may just be an illusion hiding
Hmm.
what really actually happened. So that's another theory out there. Just one other detail that a lot of people get wrong about the case is that the pancakes and whether or not they had salt in them. Many people have tried to make a connection to kind of fairy lore on this
Right.
idea that the food does not have salt in them. And so for many years, and a lot of the literature on this case will present the fact that these pancakes did not have salt, and then trying to connect that to the kind of idea of fairy lore. But the pancakes did actually, in fact, have salt. Like all
Did
the
they?
analysis showed that they did have salt in them. Like I said, they were now analyzed at least a few times, a couple times by the U.S. Air Force, who had gotten 2 samples of the pancakes, and they were analyzed by, like I say, a reporter who visited Joe Simonton later on and got a little bit of it. Even the reporter tasted some himself, said it tasted again like cardboard, really bland, just like nothing basically. Um, and he had them tested, and all the analysis showed they're basically just really brand like basic pancakes, like with I think it was like buckwheat or whatever,
Yeah, but yeah, yeah.
and some salt and basically just like oil. So
Well, even just the fact that I had no idea that Joe Simonton had any interest in UFOs before his alleged encounter. So he had attended like at least a UFO meeting,
yeah,
from this. That is a detail that I feel like should be that I mean like that changes how you perceive it, because like the way it was always like kind of presented as like here's this farmer just going about his own business, having a little breakfast. He had never thought about a flying saucer his entire life, and then all of a sudden this happens. Like, do you know much about his life after this event?
yeah.
Like, did he stay in UFOs? Did he ever speak anywhere? Like, did he ever claim to have another encounter? Because I'd always heard that he claimed to have other encounters, but I don't know if that's true. What else do you know about his life?
Yeah, so one of the you mentioned he's a farmer. Like that's also kind of one of the kind of the inaccurate bits of information that go around. A lot of people presented him as a simple chicken farmer. Like
Hmm.
he wasn't a chicken farmer, he was a plumber. He
Okay.
just happened to live with some chickens, and I mean, he's no more a farmer than I'm a farmer,
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so he was actually a plumber. But yeah, so there was allegedly. So not only did he have his sighting, there was kind of some neighbors on a nearby interstate that claimed to see something roughly the same day, same
Mhm.
kind of morning, that can kind of act as confirmation of at least something, perhaps. But as far as other sightings, he did allegedly, I believe, have 2 additional ones. I've actually been trying to track down with there's a researcher, Richard Hayden, who actually lives in Wisconsin and investigated a lot of this case and has helped me out a bit. Because he recalls that there was actually mentions in newspapers, and I believe the months later of like a different sighting that he had, but we've been unable to track down the actual paper clipping.
Mhm.
I believe there is an article that was written many years later that mentions that he had follow-up kind of sightings, but he did absolutely kind of he a lot of people, they act like, oh, you don't make anything off this, like there's no financial motive, but to be honest, I think there might have been a little bit of financial motive, at least in how he handled the case later on. So Joe Simonton pretty much immediately started selling this pamphlet of his, about what he saw as space pancake. And it was really just a small, like 3-fold sheet of paper kind of thing that he sold for like $1 a pop, which $1 a pop at the time is a decent chunk of change, and he sold
Yeah.
quite a bit of these. Um, he would go to various church and like Lions Club meetings and stuff. Then they'd have him speak, and he'd sell like these things, and he'd get like a small speaking fee or whatever for it. And one of the other cool things he did is that Aunt Jemima's actually teamed up with him to do Aunt Jemima pancake events.
Shut up! No
Yeah.
way! No,
So,
this is amazing.
so I don't know if people know, like, there's like no real Aunt Jemima. There were actors, like there's different actors that would play Aunt Jemima throughout the years, but they would have these Aunt Jemima pancake events that they did with Joe Simonton. They did at least one. I think there might have been a couple of them that they did just kind of like a team up thing after. I think it was like a year or two after the event happened. And I
That is
posted news
wonderful.
clips of those events that he was at with Aunt Jemima's as well, like my threads.
That see, okay, that is this is like kind of blowing my mind because like I feel like I had no idea, and like I've been in love with this case like a lot of people who love UFOs for a long time because it's so weird, so bizarre, and it's just fun. I'm sorry, it's a fun case, but like knowing now that he had at least a mild interest in UFOs prior to this event, and then was I mean like that just it does change how you perceive the case a little bit. Not saying like the case needs to be thrown out, like or anything like that, but wow. Wow, that is just amazing. I want to first off, thank you so much for your time. But before there's this case that I've been fascinated with for a long time. There was a book in the early 80s called Night Siege by Dennis Pilkis, and I might be pronouncing that wrong.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you know what I'm talking about? And it was just to kind of paraphrase, it was this for the listeners. It was this case where this family on a farm was having almost kind of like Skinwalker Ranch type stuff. Like kind of like almost supernatural Bigfoot type things, some ufological things happening. And but I'm more interested in Dennis Pilkis because Dennis Pilkis in the 70s was like in charge of 3 UFO groups and was pretty involved in like the Ohio Bigfoot scene.
Hmm.
And he was like deeply invested in the UFO kind of para weird world. And then he came out with Night Siege, and there's supposed to be a follow up. But after Night Siege, it seems like Dennis disappeared. And I've done some deep digging into this with one of my research partners, Nathan Isaac, and we almost sort of think that maybe he was hoaxed on this. And I won't go into too many reasons why I think that, because we're going to do kind of a project about it. But do you know much about Dennis Pilkis and the Night Siege affair and like why he disappeared?
I don't know a huge deal. I know he did used to have a tape service he was also involved with.
Yeah.
That in fact, I don't know if it was, maybe it was even you, like a year or so ago. I tried to inquire about where these tapes may be,
Right.
because they have various lectures he did on like these events.
Yeah.
So I know he's involved with that, but I don't know where he went to or where he disappeared to. And sometimes that just kind of happens in this topic. There'll be people that will come to this topic, even be pretty big names kind of in the topic. Like there's a guy named like Alan Hendry who used to be CUFO's, the Center of UFO Studies, is like head of like investigations, and he wrote the excellent book, the UFO Handbook. That if you want to get into UFO investigations, like actually like looking at and solving and investigating cases, that's a good book. That MUFON has their own kind of investigative manual, but Alan Hendry wrote a book called the UFO Handbook that's quite good. And he was all over all the international UFO reporter journals, like he was involved in putting all those out. But then he just left the topic entirely, just gone, like, and has no interest in talking with anyone anymore. We were talking about Doty. William Moore is another one of these guys.
Absolutely.
William Moore left the topic and is gone, and has no interest in talking to anyone anymore. The only time apparently he pops his head up is if somebody tries to post his scanned copies of his copyrighted material online. He'll pop up to have a fit apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's people that come and go, and sometimes we never know why, because they don't tell us. They just like they take off. And there's same thing with some British researchers that were pretty big like in the 60s, and then they just kind of like dropped off the topic. So there's a lot of people that just I don't know, they just get tired of it. They
Right.
figure there's no more reward in it and to move on to something else. But they disappear, and we don't know what happened to them. So
Yeah, I've been fascinated by Armin Victorian and Henry Azadel. He had many names, but that kind of
yeah.
I mean he's such an interesting figure to where he came into like the British UFO scene, kind of like pretended to be almost like he was almost like a man in black type of figure where he like kind of infiltrated UFO groups and was like bossy, demanding all this material. He was calling like famous ufologists in America and kind of like
Yep.
holding their feet to their fire, and then he disappears.
Yeah. Maybe he stole too many orchids. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, because he was an orchid smuggler. Like I mean,
yeah,
it's so
uh, maybe some people just get burnt out and that's understandable. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that, but uh, it'd be nice if we knew why. But some people just, I guess, they don't feel they owe us an explanation, so
Right.
they dip out and they're gone. So
Right. Yeah. It's one of my kind of like pet things I'm fascinated with is like disappearing ufologists. Like for some reason I'm like I want like what was Jamie Chandra's life like after the 80s and the MJ12 stuff. Like I would love to know like what happened. Like
yeah, that's another person that just through what I've done, just brief looking into because of other people of interest in what happened to this guy after the fact, and yeah, that's I don't know. I also looked at some of the stuff he did before UFOs, like some of the television projects he was involved in, some kind of campy movies and stuff. But
right.
and him and Stanton Friedman were working on this kind of project that never came to fruition. That was featured in an old kind of like a cinema special effects magazine. They showed kind of the set that they were working on, and Stanton Friedman's brought in, and Jamie Chandra is producing, and nothing ever happened of it. But yeah, that's another guy that's just, and some of these people may in fact be dead now. They may just not be
Yeah.
around, but
Yeah.
some of them I think are still around. They just have completely left the topic.
Right. Do you have any idea if Dennis Pilkis is still alive? Because I have found two people who fit the bill, two Dennises, and one I believe died in 2022, and then the other one I've actually made every effort to get in touch with this person, but all the emails bounced back, and nothing, they've never written back to me. But do you know if the Dennis we're thinking about who wrote Night Siege is still around?
I I I want to say I heard he's not, but I can't say for sure. That's just
Right.
vague memory off the top of my head.
Right.
A year
Right.
ago when I was asking people about it.
Yeah, because he claimed to have like these audio recordings of all this like wild stuff that was happening on that farm. Because I guess, the whole time he was investigating the Night Siege book. He was actually taking audio recordings during like events that were actually happening, supposedly. And so I've been trying to actually got in contact with Barry Greenwood, and he thinks he did have it at one time. And he's like, honestly, I just I'm not able to look through all my stuff. I think maybe it might be at the David Marlin Museum.
Yeah.
So I need to just road trip it down there and see if I can find Dennis Pilkis's audio recordings. So those would be valuable because, like you said, he did have a ton of like lectures recorded and stuff.
And even if it's not per se his copy of the tapes, like he had a tape service, so it seems to me somebody must have ordered tapes from him that their stuff is now with Marler or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, that'd be the best place to look these days to
Yeah.
find those
Yeah.
original things.
Jeff, this has been so much fun. It is so rare I get to actually speak with someone with your knowledge and also just your passion for keeping these stories alive. And I cannot tell you enough. I hope I'm not embarrassing you. Your work is so damn valuable to people like me and many others out there who deeply care about the stories, like the folklore of all this. 'Cause, like, it's folklore until it's not, kind of. You know what I'm saying? And like that doesn't make it any less important because like we were mentioning earlier, like the cultural impact is undeniable. Like if all of this is mass hysteria that's been happening, in the 20th century, the 21st century, that's just as important and just as interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, and like, it's just your work is so damn valuable. And also, I discovered this morning you have a Patreon that people can contribute to help you with, some of the expenses. I know you spend a lot of your own money to do all this stuff. And so I will absolutely, I would love to put a link to your Patreon. I am going to contribute to your Patreon as well this evening because I'm so damn excited. Because I mean, I can't even tell you how valuable I do. Like a lot of times, Nebraska history, folklore lectures, and I have used some of the stuff that you have, put on your Twitter and your, Today in UFO History. So, my man, I just personally, on a personal level, thank you so much for what you're doing. It is like so valuable to me. Like I said, I don't go on Twitter very much anymore. I go to check out this Pavement Historian, which is my favorite band of all time, and your UFO stories. That is it. That is the only thing pulling me to Twitter X these days. So thank you so much. And would you mind telling the folks where they can find more of your work?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. So my work right now, I cross post everything on Twitter, and you can find me just at Mr. Jeff Knox, Knox, like the fort. Same thing with Blue Sky. You can find me with the same handle there. So I cross post everything there, and I also post everything on my Facebook account, which you can find with my name. Um, and for the last 6 months, or almost 6 months, I've been posting specifically Blue Book unknown cases, just cases from the Blue Book files, on a platform called the UFO Discovery Forum. That's something that Alejandro Rojas created. So right now you can find my work there. I was involved with a show called UFO Sunset, where I presented kind of longer lectures on a lot of these cases, like Joe Simonton, that you can find on YouTube. And we're working on the next episode. My next lecture is going to be on dumbbell-shaped kind of UFO cases. And so it's already basically prepared. I've just got to record it so we can put it up on the show.
Hell yes.
So,
And by the way, the UFO Sunset it's so good. It literally is like you just mentioned. It is lectures on, and like you said, like there's cases, but there's like niche topics. Like, where are you going to find a lecture on dumbbell UFOs, folks? You're not going to find it anywhere except for our boy Jeff Knox. So,
well, I even did for the Valençol case, I did a part 2 where I discussed Inuit and like Penobscot, Algonquin, like dwarf legends, and how they kind of relate to the case. So, and my show co-host does a lot of UFO adjacent stuff like fairy lights and clouds and balloons and cool stuff. Rachel does that. So we've been on break most of this year, but about a month I think we'll probably have a new episode, we're hoping. So
good. I'll look forward to that.
Cool.
Well, folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of High Streams. You will find the links to where you can find all of Jeff's works in the show notes. Jeff Knox, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your time, and thank you for doing what you're doing, friend. I appreciate it.
Cool. You're welcome.
All right, friends, everyone, y'all enjoy your dinner tonight, and we'll see you next time. Peace.